Hi, everyone. In this episode, we're going to critique an anti-MDMA video called The Ripple Effect, created by and starring Josiah Brooks. Brooks is a popular Australian YouTuber known as Jazza. His YouTube channel has almost 5 million subscribers, where he essentially teaches people how to draw. I'm really not sure how or why he decided to take part in an anti-drug campaign. It appears like an anti-drug organization in Australia called Red Frogs might have recruited him to do it, but perhaps he came up with the idea totally on his own. I don't know. But I do know that he is seriously ignorant about the issue of drugs, drug culture, and especially what constitutes effective drug education. The saddest part of this whole thing is that Jazza seems to believe he's helping young people. He actually thinks he's engaging in honest drug education. In a recent article in the Australian Daily Telegraph, he's quoted as saying, "I think it is important to not talk down to your audience, and in drug education, it is important that they don't see the drug as stigmatized." Yet there's literally zero drug education in this video at all. And as you'll see soon, it's filled with stigmatizing caricatures of drugs and the people who use them. There's nothing new or progressive about what he's doing here in this video. It's classic anti-drug propaganda that paints all drug use as simply dangerous and irresponsible, setting up a false dichotomy between the good people who never use drugs and the stupid people who do. This video isn't going to stop a single person from using MDMA or any other party drug, and neither is it going to help anyone who does choose to partake stay safe. In fact, the video perpetuates cultural stereotypes that only reinforce dangerous, irresponsible drug-taking behaviors. Even the name The Ripple Effect was chosen to suggest that if you use party drugs, this has a negative ripple effect on the people around you. It's simple condemnation, and you can see it in the language being used. The campaign claims to be educating people on the perils of party drugs. But the fact is, the vast majority of people who use MDMA, even under the regime of prohibition, which creates nearly all the risks, suffer no harm and receive important benefits from their use. And everyone knows this. It's more than obvious to anyone who's ever taken MDMA, and clearly Jazza hasn't. And by refusing to acknowledge this, the overwhelmingly positive side of MDMA use, both individually and culturally, Jazza is only helping create the very irresponsible drug culture he claims to be trying to prevent. By insisting, as you'll see in this video, that there's no way to use MDMA responsibly, he's only manifesting what he preaches. Yet he doesn't even realize he's preaching. He thinks that because the video presents a kind of surreal fictional game show, somehow he's being different from the typical anti-drug propaganda we've been subjected to for decades under prohibition. He says in the Telegraph article, quote, "By framing the offer to take drugs through the lens of a game show, it serves a dual purpose of showing the effect of peer pressure on the character's choices while not appearing to preach." This is pure self-delusion, people. Just because the video is absurd in a comedic, a ridiculous sort of way, doesn't make it less preachy. It even contains a reference to your brain being scrambled eggs if you use drugs. Literally, an ecstasy tablet in the form of a puppet shows the main character a bunch of scrambled eggs and tells him, "This is going to be your internal organs if you use MDMA." Then there's the whole notion of peer pressure as the only reason young people could possibly choose to use drugs, right? Jazza wants to, quote, "show the effect of peer pressure on young people's choices" without being preachy. But the very idea that young people only choose to use drugs because they're somehow succumbing to the pressure of others is not only false, but it's insulting. Jazza, if you're listening to this, can you even entertain the possibility that someone somewhere might make a responsible choice on their own to use MDMA? Can't you see you're adopting a moral position that using MDMA or other party drugs is always bad? Do you realize that by telling this falsehood to young people, that all you're doing is perpetuating dangerous stereotypes and causing harm? Look, at a minimum, your video does nothing good for the world, because not a single person who uses or is considering using MDMA is going to take it seriously. But really, it's worse than that. Your video actually perpetuates harm. I hope you listen to this episode, and I hope you learn something. This is supposedly the first video in a series you're planning on producing. I hope you learn about harm reduction and start incorporating those principles into your future videos. You know, it's never too late. All right, so let's start the critique. What you're about to hear, everyone, is actually the first section of my Patreon podcast, Drug Nonsense. My new co-host, Mason Brooks, and I have a lot of fun picking it apart. We play audio segments from the video and then comment on how ridiculous it is. You're going to love it. Nobody else anywhere is doing this. At least, I haven't heard anyone else do it. But it's so important. If we want to save lives, if we want to help young people be safe, we need to confront dangerous anti-drug propaganda like this. We need to give people like Jazza flack for the irresponsible videos they produce that only increase drug-related fatalities by perpetuating irresponsible drug culture. These people really think they're doing good for the world. We need to let them know they aren't. And remember, if you like this episode and you want to hear more stuff like it, head over to patreon.com/drugpositive and become a subscriber. For as little as $3 a month, not only will you get access to the second half of this episode, but you'll get immediate access to all our other drug nonsense episodes, where we critique similar anti-drug nonsense in the mainstream media. Thank you, and here we go. You're listening to Drug Nonsense, the podcast exposing the falsehoods and sheer idiocy of the mainstream media's reporting about drugs.
Matt?
Kelly?
I haven't seen you in
It's been
ages.
so long.
How good is this party?
Now, this party is crazy cool.
What would make this party even crazier and cooler?
What could possibly make this party even crazier and cooler?
Drugs.
Do you have any drugs on you?
You know it.
Oh, yes,
I want
yummy,
mine.
yummy, juggy. Please. Oh.
Hey, Matt. Are you going to take it? Or are you just going to stand there and get to know it a little bit?
That was a new anti-drug video put out by this organization in Australia called Red Frog. Supposedly they do work at festivals, but they're not really harm reduction. And this was the first video in a series called The Ripple Effect, which they describe as a definitive special investigation into recreational drug use, drug culture, and the devastating impact overdoses have on Australian families and friends. We're going to pick this thing apart for you because, you know, they claim that they're being real, that they're not using scare tactics, and they're not stigmatizing the drug or people who use drugs, but clearly they are.
In a way, they're sort of paying lip service to harm reduction. They are saying that they're promoting non-stigmatizing sort of treatment of substance use. They're saying that they're educating people to make informed decisions, but that's not really the case. And as you'll see as we work through the audio from this video, it's really incredible that they managed to even tell themselves that they're not stigmatizing things. I mean, this video is ridiculous.
You know, they say here that they're presenting a definitive investigation into drug culture. But when you hear some of the clips in this thing, like, it's not a drug culture I've ever been in. It's such a caricature of what, you know, people who have never used drugs think people who use drugs are like. And to the degree that that might be true, what we as harm reductionists need to do is change that culture by presenting responsible use. But they can't bring themselves to say any drugs can ever be used responsibly, so they just present this caricature of irresponsible drug users and say, you don't want to be like this because there's no other way to use drugs other than like this. They don't come right out and say, don't use drugs, but it reeks everywhere inside of this.
Yeah, the only character in this video that has any sort of modicum of self-care, caution, or reflection is the main character, who is constantly spoken over, shamed by both his friends in the scene and the host that is a stand-in for Red Frogs, the organization.
They go on to say that the Ripple Effect campaign aims to educate young Australians through their own eyes, whatever that means, and in turn, parents on the dangers associated with taking party drugs. And this always triggers me because when a group says that they are educating people on the dangers, right away, they're not educating people on the benefits. They're not even going to mention them. And they're going to lose credibility immediately with the young people who are going to consume their educational material.
Yeah. They present themselves in this very sort of clean, progressively minded kind of way, but the entire sort of program reeks of the moralizing sort of tone that's been predominant in drug discourse for decades. Coming straight from their website, they describe themselves as, with over 20 years of experience working with young people, we understand the mainstream cultural pressures that your students will encounter surrounding drugs and alcohol. That's why we make it our mission to provide direct relief by educating students on the choices and challenges they will face in life, helping them to understand the consequences of their actions, and instead build healthy ways to stay true to themselves, both physically and mentally.
And of course, that means to them, don't use drugs. You see, they're presenting this dichotomy of this unhealthy drug culture that, of course, is spread only through peer pressure as against all those other people who never use drugs. And I mean, this whole notion of peer pressure is something that really appeals to parents, right? Parents who want to think that their kid would never use drugs, and if they do, it must be because of pressure put on them by their peers. Of course, not because of any benefits that drugs might have in their life.
All right, shall we work our way into the video?
Sure. So the whole video follows this guy, Matt, who's at a party who's trying to decide whether he's going to take an ecstasy tablet or not. And it breaks off into a cartoon where they start describing where the pill came from. And they do it in such a way to make it seem really sketchy, right? Okay, so let's check this out.
The story of your pill started in Hebei, China. Now, the chemical was smuggled into the Netherlands, where in a small basement laboratory it was processed into a hallucinogenic brown granular powder, the raw form of MDMA, a close chemical cousin to methamphetamine or ice. You're goddamn right.
So where do we start with this? First off, they describe MDMA as being a close chemical cousin to methamphetamine. Now, MDMA does stand for methylene dioxymethamphetamine, but you can change a small part of a molecule and it does a totally different thing. The fact that it has methamphetamine in the name does not mean that it is physically, emotionally the same as methamphetamine in any sort of way.
So, number one, people and anyone that's taken both meth and MDMA knows this. So they're discredited right away because MDMA is nothing like methamphetamine. Meth releases dopamine. MDMA releases serotonin and oxytocin. It's a completely different feeling. Meth you can redose all the time, all day long. It has a higher addiction potential. People really get into trouble with it. You can't take MDMA over and over and over again. It just doesn't... It's like pretending that these two drugs are the same is only used as a scare tactic, whether they want to think that or not.
On to the next scare tactic, happening, 5-10 seconds after the first one. MDMA is not a brown granular powder if it's manufactured by anyone who has any idea what they're doing.
Don't take brown MDMA, people. Try to find white MDMA if you can. There's contaminants left over in it if it's brown.
They specify that this MDMA was manufactured in a basement in the Netherlands.
Of course.
Not really sure why the location in the building is important. I guess basements have this cultural connotation of being sketchier than the ground level of a building.
Right. Okay, so they're off to a good start here, and you're kind of getting to see how this thing is going to progress. So let's move on to this next part. I love this part. This is where they use the adulterated market to scare kids, but of course, never anywhere through this whole video do they tell people that there is a way they can test their pills first. They just say there could be anything in it, and you never know what you're getting, of course. And this is really ironic, especially given the fact that in Australia for the past 2 years has been this raging debate between the real harm reduction groups like Unharm, headed up by Will Tregony, and longtime harm reduction activists like David Caldecott. They've actually got politicians on board with pill testing at festivals, the Green Party and others, and it's caused a backlash from the conservatives. And I think this video series is one of them. And of course, they just ignore the whole pill testing debate completely, pretending that it doesn't exist. And they utilize an effective prohibition, counterfeit pills and adulterated pills, as if it were just a natural effect of drugs in general. So here, check this out.
Your pill was picked up by a criminal drug lord who really wanted to get more bang for his buck. So he adds in some caffeine, some ketamine, and some bath salts for good measure, just to give it some extra kick. Sometimes enough of a kick to kill people, but hey, he gets way more money when he does it like this, so why the hell wouldn't he?
Okay.
All right, so first off, there's not ketamine in your MDMA pills.
It's very rare.
If you go to ecstasydata.org, you can search for ketamine and you can see the incidence of something being sold as MDMA that's actually misrepresenting ketamine is very, very rare.
Right. And of course, there are bath salts all the time in counterfeit ecstasy tablets, and caffeine is very common too, but ketamine is clearly going to give you a feeling that you don't actually want.
But people don't understand what ketamine is and they're afraid of it, so let's throw it in the video, right?
Yeah, and if you did get ketamine, it's not going to contribute to a death, because ketamine is one of the safest drugs in the world.
So we didn't play the whole thing for you, but throughout this whole sort of cartoon depicting the supply chain, production chain of MDMA, they're choosing the sketchiest, most caricatured characters possible to try and convey this narrative of what the production chain looks like, right? Everyone is shady. Everyone has tattoos and body modifications, and that obviously makes people incredibly shady. I have a purple mohawk, and I can't walk down the street without young children screaming. So
I would be afraid to get drugs from you.
You should be.
Oh, wait. Never mind. Yeah, so maybe you're getting the idea. So here, listen to this one. This is a perfect example of how ridiculous it is that they claim they're not stigmatizing drugs or drug users. Okay, ready?
And so that, my friend, is how you end up with that cute little pill in your hand. Yummy, yummy. Well, Matt, what are you waiting for? Are you up for a good time?
Yummy, yummy.
So, you know, I was the kid in high school who found the LSD and the MDMA and turned on all my friends to it. And I never used words like that. I found great benefits from psychedelics and I wanted my friends to experience them too. And I did it responsibly. And I read everything I could back at the time before the internet was out, right? In the library. How do you do these things safely and responsibly? They're just creating a dichotomy between the crazy, irresponsible people who use drugs and the responsible people who don't, instead of trying to change the culture and make it a positive culture where people use responsibly.
And this sort of, the tone that they go about using for this is like almost trying to portray substance use as something that's inherently tied to this ravenous desire for consumption in a way that is really alienated from the way that substances sort of fit into most people's lives, especially if they're trying to attend to the health of that sort of relationship, right?
Right. It's this Protestant anti-pleasure attitude and this false notion that drugs only give pleasure, that there's no other effects, there's no certainly any benefits or healing effects from them. If you use them, it's just because you're trying to escape and they're dangerous. They cause addiction, these really simplistic notions people have about drugs. That's why the title of this video is How Drugs, Pills Affect You. They don't even talk about specific drugs. It's just supposed to be drugs in general or pills in general, right?
Yeah, and this is not to say that consuming substances for pleasure is a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with seeking pleasure in our lives. Pleasure is part of being alive.
It's about knowing why you're using a drug and escaping from the fucked up drug culture that this video is presenting.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's where it gets hysterical. There's a puppet of an ecstasy tablet that starts talking and putting pressure on Matt to ingest him. So let's listen to this.
I'm the ecstasy you've only felt in your craziest dreams. What do you want to do? Well, first, you let me inside you. And then we get to feel each other. And I mean really feel each other. I am going to make you feel so hot. And you're going to sweat. And your heart will race. And you will feel alive. And I'm going to want you to take me again. To take me again and again. Oh, God, take me now, God damn it. I'm gonna heat you up so much you're gonna cook from the inside. See this egg? That's gonna be your fucking brain and your kidney and your muscle tissue, man.
Oh, and I could be a real heartbreaker, you know? Like a literal heartbreaker. Like put you in fucking cardiac arrest. But I don't do that to everyone. Just the special ones.
So if you go to the website and you look at this video, you can see what this puppet looks like. It makes it that much funnier. Bright pink puppet looks kind of like Pac-Man. very large bow tie on the head, very dead, cold eyes. And one thing that stood out to me about this is that the way that this puppet's going about trying to pressure Matt into consuming this pill is layered very heavily with this very sexual tone that sort of ties in the really moralizing, puritanical mentality about substance use to this condemnation of pleasure as a whole, of denying sexuality, of latching onto this notion of just raw, non-specific degeneracy that you need to protect your children from, right? Like, your kid is going to go to a party and they're going to be offered a drug. They're going to be irresponsible in every way conceivable, engaging in risky sexual practices, engaging in risky substance use. And this is just scare tactics.
Yeah, it's the same old thing, associating drug use with hedonism and reckless abandon. And that's the way a lot of the anti-drug people see sex also, right? They're probably against condoms for the exact same reason they're against harm reduction. It's like Puritanism. I had a safe sex educator tell me once that she went to this private religious school to talk about condoms to the board of directors to see whether they were going to have condom education in their school. And she realized immediately that she was just the token person, that they were never going to allow that in their school. And a sympathetic board member came to her afterwards and put it to her this way. She said, you know, we have our A students who are never going to have premarital sex. And then we have our C and D students, and nothing that we do is going to stop them. They're just going to have premarital sex anyway. But what we're concerned about are our B students, the ones who haven't yet decided whether to have premarital sex. And she was using the grade system, not that that's the grades they got, but just as a metaphor for how good they were around sinning, right? This board of this school didn't care about health and safety. They weren't trying to save lives. They were trying to save souls. And I think it's important that we remember this about the people who we are sort of fighting against to try to get harm reduction policies out there. They really think that if you have used a drug, you deserve to die. If you engage in premarital sex, well, you've already sinned. There's nothing we can do unless you repent, right? It's a religious attitude in a lot of ways.
The thing that immediately comes to mind from you saying that is there's a quote from my favorite philosopher, Gilles Deleuze, that goes something like, "The best of all possible worlds rests upon the shoulders of the damned, for the damned, having forsaken progress, open up infinite quantities of progressiveness." Right? In order to change the sort of material circumstances in this world that lead to suffering and destitution, we can't turn our backs on people that conservative religious folk like this might look at and see as damned. Right? Leaving people behind doesn't do anything but worsen the problem. And these people aren't damned. None of us are damned. We all
I don't know. I think you're going to hell for all your drug use, Mason.
Yeah, I am. I'm damned, but none of you are. So
yeah, again, they're setting up a dichotomy. They're setting up division between two different kinds of people and saying you need to be this kind of person, not this, right? The thing I want to say about this segment we just heard is, you know, like the word hot has two meanings. Like, I think they were kind of clearly using it with a sexual innuendo, but also they start talking about the actual risks of taking MDMA in hot environments and dancing forever, right? But the pill saying, I'm going to make you hot, just puts all the blame on the pill, as if just taking MDMA itself is going to cause overheating and hyperthermia, etc. And they actually describe the effects of hyperthermia. Like, literally, your organs can cook, right? So they use this graphic description of, look at this, your inside, these are going to be yours, ha 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 ha.
Yeah,
and then
the puppet is showing Matt a large metal tin that we're told is filled with cooking eggs, which that's not a blatant throwback to this is your brain on drugs at all. It's kind of
right. Right. So again, here, they're not giving any information on how someone who uses MDMA could mitigate the risks of overheating. They just have this pill saying that I do it to some people, but not others, right? Again, the whole Russian roulette kind of argument that you just don't know, you might be the one person that dies. They actually do kind of start to touch on the behavioral and environmental factors involved in the risk, but they kind of do it dismissively, and then they just put all the blame on the user. Listen to this. It's kind of subtle here, but this is kind of weird.
Molly, can you just knock us over the top?
If we end up in a toxic relationship, it's not all my fault. With all your drinking and dancing, if you can't handle me or slow yourself down, well, that's on you. So, baby, you up for a good time?
They are touching on the fact that the risks of MDMA use are not just chemical, they are behavioral, they are situational, they are contextual. But instead of moving from there to discuss the fact that because these things are contextual and contingent that we can mitigate them, it is just deflecting all accountability for anything that goes wrong onto the user. And it's kind of weird trying to work through this because in a certain sense, we do have to be accountable of the impacts of our choices, but at the same time putting all of the accountability on a user who's not been adequately educated. They're not teaching us to value that, and they're deflecting all sort of responsibility that they have as an educational organization to intervene in that.
They are certainly letting the promoters off the hook too, because the environments themselves can be too hot, right? DanceSafe works with promoters to provide safe settings all the time. It's often not just the drug user's fault. We are all responsible, all of us. These people are causing fatalities right here. This video, Red Frogs and their ripple effect videos are having a detrimental effect on public health.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah.
If you die, it's not on.
It's not on us. It's all on you, buddy.
It's on you, and it's on this anthropomorphized ecstasy pill with dead eyes.
Okay, so now here's where this famous YouTuber from Australia comes in named Jazza and does this game show. I guess they're trying to illustrate more peer pressure, right? They continually use the phrase, "why not?" So listen to this.
Why not?
Did I just hear somebody saying, why not? Sounds like you folks are ready for a game I like to call... Why not? I offer you something to try, and you decide whether you want to go for it like the bloody legend you are, mate, or if you want to chicken out. So, are you ready?
I don't see why not.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
So, Matt, if you choose, put the pill down and walk away, or you can down the pill you've been nursing gently there for the last 10 minutes and have an incredible night. So, Matt, why not?
All right, if you guys think it's all right, then why not?
So, Mason, why do you use certain substances?
Why not?
Wait, why not, right? Why
It's
not?
because I have no critical thinking skills whatsoever, and I don't care about my well-being. That's why I do it.
Right. You see what they're presenting here? They're presenting people who use drugs as being careless and thoughtless, and everyone that's around him is shouting, why not, why not? And the whole game show is why not? As if there's no way you would ever use drugs if you thought about it even for a minute. That is the clear implication that they're doing there. Is that stigmatizing?
Why not? It's weird going through this too, because the main character in this video is the only one that has any sort of inclination towards caution, towards moderation. They offer him a second pill, and he says, I don't really know about that. Like, is it really going to do very much? I know that if I take more, that the risks sort of get more likely. And as this sort of game show scenario goes on, the host and the crowd around him get more and more aggressive and dismissive and interrupt him, mocking, going, no. And it's just ridiculous that they have this component of the video that they could very easily, and they should work into a discussion about how Matt is trying to make the right decisions. And the game show host, more than anyone else, who is the stand-in for this organization, is cutting him off and preventing anyone that's watching this video from getting the message that Matt is actually on the right track before he's derailed for the sake of scaring people.
Right. Because, of course, anyone who uses drugs isn't going to have anything responsible to say as to why you might want to partake. You should by now be seeing the caricatures they're setting up and the false dichotomy between people who use drugs and people who would never use drugs. And he represents, for the parents, the child who's on the fence and is going to be pressured by their peers. So they provide parents with exactly the imagination they have that there's all of these irresponsible people trying to convince my kid to go down the path of sin. That's what this is all about.
And they keep tempting him more and more and more. Listen to this one.
So, my offer for round 2. You could call it there and just go enjoy the rest of the party feeling as good as you are. Or we could take it up a notch with one more pill.
I mean, I feel pretty good. Would it make that much of a difference? Why not?
Why not? Matt, I do it all the time. And your cousin Dylan, remember he had 5 in one night? And he had the best night ever. So I say, why not?
Why not? Why not? Why not? Why not?
This actually really fucking pisses me off here, right? Because they've already lost credibility with everyone watching this video. And now they're trying to say that someone that took 5 pills at one point had a really great time, whereas they just should be saying never do that. So I believe this is actually going to encourage people to take more than 1 pill in a night. The whole thing is so ridiculous and absurd that young people aren't going to believe anything that this video is telling them. I mean, nothing's really factual in it anyway. And now they have the drug users that they're making fun of saying that there is incidences where people have had a great time taking 5 pills. Taking 5 pills is the most dangerous thing that you can do.
What about taking 6 pills?
I don't know how to respond to that.
Only take an odd number of pills or you're going to die. So at the end of this video, Matt is sitting at a table with a game show host. He is visibly disoriented. He's visibly covered in sweat, and he dies of a drug overdose, which is actually, and they say this in the video, the consequence of an adulterated tablet. One of the last lines in this video is the game show host asking Matt, "Do you know what's in your pill?" The correct answer is, "You don't fucking know." Lights start flashing, bells start ringing, everyone cheers, and Matt falls down on the ground. The video is over.
Right. And then they say, "Congratulations, you win an overdose." But when you think about it, this was not an overdose. This was a death from a contaminated tablet that contained other drugs than what you thought were in there. I really hate the fact that anytime someone dies from a drug-related death, the media calls it an overdose. And the reason they do is because it puts the blame totally on the user. When we hear the word overdose, we think, oh, this was a person taking too much. This was a person who was chasing that high. So therefore, it's not our fault, right? But the irony here is that the game show host, Jazza, YouTube star, who thinks he's doing such great things for the world, actually says that, oh, you died because you didn't know the actual ingredients of what was in your pill. That is a result of prohibition that can be remedied through drug checking services. So Jazza, why don't you support the campaign going on in Australia right now to provide pill testing services at festivals, huh? That would be doing a lot more for the people of your country than making this ridiculous video.
Because he has no idea what he's talking about. For those of you that are unfamiliar, I believe that Jazza is famous on YouTube for drawing things, which I support the arts. I think that we should, but drawing things on the internet does not make you an expert in anything other than drawing things on the internet. Not quite a parallel sort of field of knowledge to harm reduction and drug education.
Yeah, shame on you, Jazza. I kind of think he should know better, right? I mean, I can't imagine anyone in today's world, given how much progress has been made in harm reduction, would think that producing a video like this is going to help people. I think he probably just did it for the money, the fame, and because it's an easy way to pretend that you're doing something good. And you know what, though, Jazza? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So you really need to think more carefully. Sorry. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Congratulations, Matt. You are the lucky winner of an overdose.